I plan on demonstrating how I skim coat a concrete basement wall using general purpose joint compound. So I'm standing at the edge of the utility area of our basement. Approximately 16 years ago, we moved our water heater down into the basement from the laundry room. And we were about to add some additional stuff in our utility room, including a sub panel and some outlets and so on. So I thought it would be nice to paint the walls before I did all that, because I knew I wasn't going to be putting drywall in this space. And I wanted to brighten it up a little bit, keep the dust down and so on. Well, in a previous house, I painted the walls and was never really able to get the paint to go inside all the voids and actually fill everything really well. So I decided to try an experiment. I just got some joint compound and just started filling in some of the voids. One thing led to another. I got a little bit carried away, and next thing I know, I had a really nice smooth finish. So I primed it and painted it, and it's held up beautifully for the last 16 years. So fast forward 16 plus years, and we're about to finish the remainder of our basement. And we decided that where we were going to originally put the wall, which would have been right about where the line of paint ends, is not really adequate for our needs now. One, we want to add a little more space so we can put up some shelving. But another is, in order to avoid the drains and stuff in the ceiling, and just make the ceiling a little bit neater, I need to extend this out about a foot, which is just, I know it's crazy, but I really need to break out the drywall tools and everything just to go through this whole process to see if I can bring out my finish about another foot or so. Now, just a quick disclaimer on all this, and before everybody gets all excited, I understand that using drywall joint compound in a basement on concrete is ill-advised. So it's what I did here is not probably the brightest thing in the world, but since I had good success with this and it's held up well for 16 years, I thought that I would just continue on, adding insult to injury as it were, and just extend this out again using the method that I used before. And I was kind of hesitant about putting this video up because I know that it's probably not the smartest thing. But if you happen to live in a dry climate like we do here in Colorado, and moisture is not really an issue, you may determine that you can use something like joint compound. And if nothing else, the techniques that I'm showing you here should apply to a more appropriate material. So for example, at the very least, one could use the setting version of joint compound that actually sets up. And more appropriately, one should really be using something that has cement in it. So if I had to do this all over again from scratch, I probably would research something a little bit more impervious to moisture. But I'm just extending this out because it's what I've already done. I have about 20 linear feet of wall done. So, to me, it's like I'm just adding an additional foot or so. And, hopefully someone will find this useful. And, maybe I'll get a lively discussion down below. So if you happen to like this video, please give me a like below and consider subscribing to my channel for more videos of this nature. So the first thing I need to do is to remove the caps from the snap ties. Now, as it happens, in the area of interest in my wall, I only have one cap. So I'm just going to use a screwdriver and just grab a hold of it and just flick it out like so. Next, I need to knock down some of the high spots. It's hard to probably see what the angle of the camera the way it is, but I can see that here it's a little high, right about where I removed that snap tie cap. So I'm going to start off by using a mason's chisel and just a 12-ounce ball peen hammer. So all you need to really do is just chip away some of the higher places, like so. And you can kind of just see by taking a nice flat chisel like so and running it across the face to see where we do have some high spots. Depending on the nature of the high spot, like in this case, there was a knot in the plywood. Yep. That popped right off of there, for example. But if you have something kind of big and too much to get with a broad chisel, you can always use a narrower cold chisel, for example. And here's another. We just keep working our way around, especially around where the snap ties were. Another common area is the joints between where the plywood was, and usually a big wide flat chisel is really all you need to break those guys loose. So the next step, I'm going to grind the studs that were from the snap ties, especially the ones like this one that are actually sticking above the concrete a little bit. Next, I will wire brush using a stainless steel wire brush. And all I'm really doing here is just knocking off the surface stuff, and then trying to, any flecks of plywood that are left over and so on. So the next step is to actually wash the wall, and in this case it's more of just about getting it damp. Now before I got to this step, I went ahead and sanded, basically scuffed up some of my paint, because I did use semi-gloss paint, and I just kind of want to give it some tooth for the drywall mud to bite in. Just gonna use a sponge, and what I hope to show, one is I'm just gonna knock off the dust for the most part, because as I mentioned before, my wall's in actually pretty good shape, okay? But hopefully, as I'm doing this, what you'll see is that the concrete is going to start really sucking in some moisture. And then the other thing, of course, that one could use, if they use it, is a scrub brush. And that'll help get the moisture in the voids a little bit more. I'll let that soak in a bit. And then I may come back and do that a couple more times. Okay, so here we go. Got some mud in the center of my hock. Got my sacrificial 3-inch drywall knife. I'll just start at the very top. Basically, I'm just going to fill in trying to work it right into those voids. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm not really trying to skim coat per se. I'm just trying to get mud packed into the voids. So you want to take your time here, and especially where the snap ties were. Just getting that mud really worked in as best as you could. You may have to go over it a couple different directions. Just kind of working your way in. And you can see takes a couple passes sometimes, a couple different directions to get into those voids. Of course, this is drywall mud, and it's just regular general purpose, so as it dries, it's going to shrink. When you think you're pretty close to getting all the voids filled in a particular patch, then you want to just scrape off all the excess. That looks okay. Again, I'm just gonna chase it, scrape off the excess. We'll call that good. So the first application of mud is complete. As I mentioned before, I worked it into the voids pretty good, and then I scraped, really just was very vigorously deliberate about scraping off the excess. So I'll let that set now, at least overnight probably, and I'll come back tomorrow and apply the next coat. So I scraped the entire section of wall down right here with my 3-inch drywall knife, and I had a few high spots that I elected to just knock down with a chisel and a hammer again. And now I'm just putting on that second coat, and it's a repeat of yesterday. But so here's another high spot. So this is a repeat of what I did yesterday. I'm just trying to fill in the voids once again, trying to fill in the low spots. But I'm putting the mud on about as thin as I can get it. So I've placed 2 very thin coats of drywall mud over my wall area, and all I need to do now is just scrape off some of the high spots, and I can do that. I do that again with my 3-inch sacrificial knife because it's still a little bit rough. But then what I'm going to plan to do now is I'm going to switch over to a 6-inch knife to put on the 3rd coat. Now before I do that, however, and after I just kind of scrape off some of the high spots, I'm not going to do any sanding at this point. But I do have a couple of areas in the concrete that are still a little bit higher, which I could ignore, but I think I just have a few, so I'm just going to pull out a cold chisel, I think, and just pop some of those guys down lower. So I think what's worth pointing out at this point is that even with just 2 really thin coats, I filled in most of the voids, and as you can see that the difference is quite remarkable between what I have done so far and what was there before. So if nothing else, just 2 quick coats, a little bit of prep work, 2 quick coats of drywall mud, a little bit of scraping down. You could run a screen over it or some sandpaper, prime and paint this wall, and you would have a wall that looks pretty respectable. But I'm going to go ahead and keep going just because I can. And if I rotate the camera around here a little bit, maybe you can see some of the areas. Like here's one, and of course I realize that I'm splitting hairs here a little bit, but what happens is as you're pulling the knife down, it kind of pops over these guys. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit those real quick. So just using a 6-inch knife, just putting on the 3rd coat, just trying to get everything covered. Again, I'm going to go pretty light, thin coat. The idea is just to keep coming back. With ever increasing the size of the knives as I go. So I let the 3rd coat dry, and I'm about to put the 4th coat on. But first I'm going to scrape it, just the high spots down. Now previously I was using this 3-inch knife, which is really not so much of a knife as it is a scraper, because it's thick and it's very, very stiff. So I'm going to use my 6-inch drywall knife, which you can see here. It has quite a bit of flex to it, and all I do is just run it down like so, for the most part, just to knock down the ridges and any of the goobers. And if I have a spot that looks a little bit more, I can go like so with it. But that's about all I really need to do. So I'll just go over the whole wall with my 6-inch knife, like I said, and then I will come back with my 8-inch knife, I think, today, and put on the 4th coat. Okay, so I'm just moving along here with my 8-inch knife. The drywall is a very forgiving process, in my opinion. So if you just take your time and you go after it just kind of carefully and slow, you know, you can get pretty nice results. So I've let the 4th coat dry overnight, and I kind of went over it really quick with a 6-inch knife just to scrape down some of the high spots. I just wanted to mention at this point that another thing that you can do is you can sand, either using sandpaper or you know, a mesh sanding grid. And I tend to do this kind of at the last step, maybe. You know, it's a mess, and it's something I like to avoid doing. You wind up just wasting a lot of mud and so on. But another technique that I like to use is you take a sponge, get it wet, and you wring it out, and you just kind of go over the high spots, and you can kind of get rid of some ridges and things. But it's particularly nice for feathering in to paint. Okay, so now I'm adding in the 5th coat. And actually I'm going to apply this coat a little heavier, just to kind of build it up a little bit, especially where I transition to the previous finish. And partly I want to get all the low spots filled in and try to make it reasonably even this time. So I've completed the finish on this section of my wall, and I just got done sanding using the sanding pad with a mesh insert. I'm probably going to go back and add one more really thin top coat just to fill in some of the pits and some of the scratches that are left over. And then this wall is ready for paint. Now note, I have no plan on texturing this wall. Let's face it, texture is for sissies. But in part because I went through a lot of trouble to make this wall nice and smooth, so I don't want to ruin it with texture. I don't like texture, but mainly it's much easier to blend in a repair or a new section of finish to an older section when it's all smooth. So I'm just going to use a fine nap roller. I'll prime this section, then I'll take everything off the wall, and I'll paint the entire wall so that I get a nice even coat of paint. So I primed the new section of the wall that I just got done finishing, and then I applied 2 coats of semi-gloss white paint to the entire wall, and finally reattached everything that I had removed prior to painting. Now, I'm actually quite pleased with how this all turned out. I don't know how well the camera can pick this up, but the only texture that I have on the wall is what was left over from the roller, and you can't see where I had blended in from the old section to the new section, you know, and certainly it's way better than in the raw concrete. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, you know, joint compound is really not the proper material to use for, you know, concrete basement walls. So if any of my viewers actually know what would be a better material, and, you know, perhaps maybe it's a 2-step thing with 2 different materials, I would be very interested to learn about that. In particular, wouldn't mind finding a material that's, you know, obviously more water resistance when cured, but it's kind of would have the fine similar texture to joint compound and give you some amount of time to work with it for, you know, amateurs like me. Now, if you made it this far in my video, thank you. And I have to assume that you must have liked it, so please click the like button below. And please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you do, you'll get to see me in the next video.